يا راغبا في كل علم نافع.
ينمو العلم ويتقدم بتقنياته ومجالاته، ومعه نطور أدواتنا في تقديم العلم الشرعي. أكاديمية
زاد أكاديمية ينبوعها صاف ليروي غلة الظمآن، ومكارم الأخلاق ندرسها معا، أدب وتربية على الإحسان. بشرى لنا زاد أكاديمية للعلم كالأزهار في البستان.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Another episode of the rights to be observed in the course of Islamic education. And this time, inshallah ta'ala, the rights of the relatives. The rights of the relatives. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us in such a way that we are having all kinds of complex relationships. And subhanallah, the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very comprehensive, is perfect, that these individuals in our life, we need to observe their rights. There is something that we will be asked about it, whether it's a close person, faraway person, friends, enemies, you call it. And one of which is, of course, the relatives, blood relatives and the like of this, and rights to be observed. Ayat in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, means through these relationships that would take the person either to the Jannah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or to wal-'iyadhu billah, to the hellfire. So, and of course the outcome or the objective of this is to establish the ubudiyyah, the servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When people, they have the relationship for the sake of Allah, to remove enmity, to bring everything and means for people to establish the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is all something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. And as the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he said in the authentic hadith, وَمَنْ كَانَ يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ فَلْيَصِلْ رَحِمَهُ. Whoever believes in Allah and the last day, then let them يَصِلْ رَحِمَهُ, to be kind to the relatives, to connect the relationship, not to sever the relationship of kin and kith. The Prophet ﷺ, he would give this clear instructions to people even when they're embracing the deen of Islam. As the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in Sahih Muslim, that a Bedouin, he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he asked the Prophet ﷺ to inform him of an action that would get him closer to the Jannah, make him among the people of Jannah and take him away from the hellfire. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, تَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ لَا تُشْرِكْ بِهِ شَيْئًا, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not to associate partners with Him, وَتُقِيمُ الصَّلَاةِ, and وَتُؤْتِ الزَّكَاةِ, to establish the salah, to give the zakah, وَتَصِلُ الرَّحِمِ, and to be kind to the relatives, to the kin and kith. So subhanAllah, even this is from the very first moment that a person is being instructed how to embrace the deen of Islam, he is commanded to be kind to his relatives as part of the rights to be observed. The word that is used in Arabic is ذوي الرحم, ذوي الرحم. And what does that means basically? ذوي الأرحام, and ذو refers to ownership. So the people of Ar-Rahim, and the Rahim is the womb. So they are basically the relatives, whether they are from one's lineage like the father and the grandfather and above, or the branches like the son and the son of son and so on, or from the brothers and sisters, or from the uncles and the aunts, paternal, maternal, all of that. Anything that is basically related to the person is part of that. I mean, of course, the terminology can be a little bit different when we're talking about the laws of inheritance. And what is meant by the sila, or the connecting the relationship or making it strong, is to basically do acts of goodness to the relatives and to whatever means of goodness that is known to the people, even if they are harmful. This is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is one way. Meaning that you as a Muslim, commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be kind to your relatives, regardless whether your relatives are being kind to you or not. So, and this is something that is going to be clearly stated inshallah ta'ala. So to be always eager to bring what is benefiting for them and to push away what's harmful for them, whether it's in this life and the hereafter. So basically, when it comes to matters of dunya and deen, matters of worldly life, matters of religion, when it comes to the religion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, وَأَنذِرْ عَشِرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ, warn your close relatives. And the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, when he first called the people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, يَا مَعْشَرَ قُرَيْشِ, O the people of Quraysh, اشْتَرُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ, purchase your life, purchase yourself. That means free yourselves from the hellfire. لا أغني عنكم من الله شيئا, I would never avail you anything from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then the Prophet ﷺ kept calling his tribes one after the other. Ya Bani Abd Manaf, la ughni ankum min Allahi shay'a. O the people of Abd Manaf, I cannot avail you anything from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ya Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib, calling his relatives, even his daughter and his aunt, Ya Safiya, Ya Fatima, and so on. So he would have that concern towards them. How can they be saved from the hellfire? And one of the things that the Prophet ﷺ said in that hadith is that when he said, Ya Fatima bint Muhammad, Salini ma shi'ti min mali, la ughni anki min Allah shay. Ask me whatever you want from my money, from my wealth. This is not the issue. It's about to be obedient to Allah, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. I cannot avail you anything from Allah. Even if He's the messenger of Allah, the best man ever walked on the face of earth, unless you save yourself by being a believer, he cannot benefit you. So this is something that which shows the importance of the relatives and to be kind to them and so on. The matters of worldly things, like for example to see what they need, if they need anything, not to wait for them to ask. And that's definitely would keep the relationship going. If the relationship is not there, you won't wait for them to come and ask you for something, but rather is to be always there for them. And when a person gives charity to his relatives, it's two rewards or two acts of virtue, one of which is sadaqah, that it's a sadaqah, it's a charity, plus the second reward because it's sila. The second action, it's a sila, it's an act of bringing the relationship together and strengthening the relationship with the relatives. So this is a point that many people overlook. When you're being kind to your relatives, it's basically you are strengthening the relationship. What strengthens the relationship? What acts of goodness can you do, as long as it's not a sin, that would strengthen the relationship between you and your relatives? This is basically the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To love them, to have mercy upon them. وَأُولُو الْأَرْحَامِ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلَى بِبَعْضٍ فِي كِتَابِ اللَّهِ. They have this kindness towards one another. They have the love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of the rights to be observed is to be patient when it comes to the harm that comes from them. If you have a relative and that relative is harmful with his speech or actions, you have to be forbearing. And knowing that this is something that is of a great reward. But the reason why you need to be forbearing is because that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from you. So it's not just because it sounds nice, right? It's all about the wahy revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, as mentioned in the hadith in Sahih Muslim, a man came to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam and he said, Ya Rasulullah, inna li qarabatan asiluhum yaqta'uni. I have relatives, I connect the relationship, I do all kinds of good things to them, but they sever the relationship. وَأُحْسِنُ إِلَيْهِمْ وَيُسِئُونَ إِلَيْهِ. I'm doing all kinds of kindness and kind actions towards them and they're harming me. وَأَحْلُمُ عَنْهُمْ وَيَجْهَلُونَ عَلَيْهِ. And I'm forbearing and then in return they treat me with ignorance. So the Prophet ﷺ said to him, لَإِن كُنْتَ كَمَا قُلْتَ. If you are as you're saying, فَكَأَنَّمَا تُسِفُّهُمُ الْمَلْ. As if you are putting dust on their mouths. ولا يزال معك من الله ظهير عليهم ما دمت على ذلك. And you would continue to have a protector from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over them as long as you are like this. You're being helped as long as you are opposing the harshness and the meanness and the bad behavior from them with goodness, with forbearance, with kindness. So we are commanded to be patient with them. And this is basically what the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned. The definition actually of the one that connect the relationship, ليس الواصل بالمكافئ, is not the one that would reward his relatives. You visit me, I visit you. You're kind to me, I'm kind to you. This is a rewardable relationship. But rather is the one that من إذا قطعت رحمه وصله. the real wasil, the real one that applies what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from him when it comes to the relatives, is the one that when they sever the relationship, he will connect it. So to be there for them in matters of their need, to continue the relationship, and to be warned against severing the relationship. Severing the relationship is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade, and this is something that is so evil, and it's mentioned in the Quran that this is from the major sins. فَهَلْ عَسَيْتُمْ إِن تَوَلَّيْتُمْ أَن تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَتُقَطِّعُوا أَرْحَامَكُمْ, that you would sever the relationship of the kin and the kith. These are the ones that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cursed. أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ لَعَنَهُمُ اللَّهُ. These are the ones that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cursed. فَأَصَمَّهُمْ وَأَعْمَى أَبْصَارَهُم. One of the most hated acts by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is severing the relationship of the relatives. As he alayhi salatu wasalam was asked, أَيُّ الْأَعْمَالِ أَبْغَضُ إِلَى اللَّهِ, what are the actions that are most hated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He said, Al-Ishraku billah, to associate partners with Allah. That's the worst sin ever. And then the man asked the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, then what? He said, then ثُمَّ قَطِيعَةُ الرَّحِمِ, to sever the relationship of the relatives. This action by itself, to sever the relationship with the relatives, is one of the things that brings some punishment in this life before the hereafter. As we mentioned this hadith before, there is no sin أحرى أن يعجل الله لصاحبه العقوبة, that it's more likely that a person would get the punishment of it in haste in this world, with still the punishment to be waiting for him in the hereafter, من قطيعة الرحم والبغي, something other than قطيعة الرحم, severing the relationship of the relatives, and transgression. It's also one of the reasons why the actions might not be accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, the deeds are presented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala every Thursday, as the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, the night of the Jumu'ah, فَلَا يُقْبَلُ عَمَلُ قَاطِعِ رَحِمٍ. As the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said in the hadith he reported by Imam Ahmad and others, that the one that severed the relationship, his actions would not be accepted. So this is a severe warning. It's also one of the means, or one of the things that prevents the person from entering Jannah. لا يدخل الجنة قاطع رحم, as the Prophet ﷺ, he said that the Jannah is not going to be admitted by someone that sever his relationship. Silat al-Rahim, to be kind to the kin and kith and the relatives, is who has more priority? The one that is closer to you. As the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُوصِيكُم بِأُمَّهَاتِكُم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving you the wasiyah, commanding you to be kind to your mothers, and then to your mothers, and then to your fathers, and then بِالْأَقْرَبِ فَالْأَقْرَبِ, then the nearer, then the nearer. So those who are nearer to you in relationship, they have more rights when it comes to your kindness and your goodness and matters of good manners that you would observe towards them, even if they are disbelievers. As Asma radiallahu anha, the daughter of Abi Bakr, she said that my mother came to me وهي mushrika. She was polytheist, a disbeliever, at the time of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. فَاسْتَفْتَيْتُ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم. She asked the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and this is always the attitudes of the believers, should I connect the relationship with my mother? Imagine that even the things that is already installed in them, the love that she has to her mother, but she wants to know first what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from her. So she said to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, أَفَأَصِلُ أُمِّي, should I be kind to her? Should I continue the relationship? He said, نعم صِلِي أُمِّكِ, which means yes, be kind to your mother, connect the relationship. And what is known to be to the people in the localities, in the environment of goodness, then it should be done. And that's why, what is the level? What's the minimum requirement? Is it a phone call? It's visiting them physically. It's to be there for them, basically, right? So things that people need to obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what's known in the religion. Otherwise, some environments, some cultures, for example, they don't have this. Their relationships are severed. So should we follow that because this is the norm of the people? Of course not. Religion comes before any of this. So is the one that keeps on connecting the relationship, and remember that very well. It's not about rewarding others. Everybody is decent with those who are decent with them. But what is then the action of the person when people are severing the relationship? You connect it, you maintain it, you strengthen it. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those who listen and follow and to be obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll continue inshallah ta'ala with more rights next time inshallah ta'ala. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
يا راغبا في كل علم نافع
ينمو العلم ويتقدم بتقنياته ومجالاته، ومعه نطور أدواتنا في تقديم العلم الشرعي. أكاديمية
زاد أكاديمية ينبوعها صاف ليروي غلة الظمآن، ومكارم الأخلاق ندرسها معا، أدب وتربية على الإحسان. بشرى لنا زاد أكاديمية للعلم كالأزهار في البستان.